And everyone, this is Ray Abdulka, like I said, with Action Pack Networks. We want to welcome you and thank you for attending today's session, Changing Landscape of Network Management. Joining us today is industry thought leader and expert Zeus Kerravala. Zeus is in really high demand, so we're honored and privileged that he can join us here today. Zeus's experience and knowledge gained has enabled him to see and analyze things from really unique angles and from both a technology and a business perspective. So, Zeus, thank you for joining us today. Before we begin, I just want to provide everyone here with some details with today's session. It'll be 45 minutes. It is live and it is interactive. And when I say interactive, there will be some polling questions within the presentation. So we kindly ask that everyone participate and share their thoughts on some of the questions that we're going to ask during the session. The webinar will be available to everyone, both the recording as well as the presentation, so we will be sending out information following this webinar. Also, we will not be opening up the audio lines for everyone, but if folks do have questions, please enter them in the chat space and we will address them at the end of the presentation. So without further ado.
Thanks, Ray. Certainly appreciate the introduction, and I'd like to thank everybody on this webinar for taking the time, their next 45 minutes of their day, to spend with us and discuss network management. I think it's a great topic to discuss. I think when you look at all the changes we've had in technology over the last half decade or so between mobile, consumer, virtualization, convergence, a lot's changed in IT. And in fact, I think IT's changed more in the past 5 years than maybe any other 5-year period in the history of technology. And I think one of the trends I've noticed, though, is I don't believe the management tools have really kept up with where the technology's gone, and I think that's really driving us through to another revolutionary change in this market. Before I start that, I just want to do a quick bio on myself. For those of you who know me, probably remember me as the longtime Yankee Group analyst, where I headed up the research team there. Prior to that, though, I was actually at a systems integrator, and I held several corporate IT positions, including CIO, for a stint as well. I tried doing many leading-edge things at the time, the voice over IP in the 90s, one of the first companies to use virtualization, so I've seen a fair bit of the technology deployed. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about where we are from an IT perspective today, and I think it's interesting to see how every decade or so we have a significant IT change that's being driven by a number of other trends being forced together. So you think about the last major shift we had in IT, and that was really to internet computing. And it wasn't really the fact that we had the internet grow or any one factor. What we had was a confluence of forces that drove us to that change. Things like the broadband at home, the popularity of things like the AOL community, the low-cost PCs, cheap processors, lower cost memory. All that stuff came together and really kicked off the internet era for us. And I think similar to that perfect storm, if you will, we're having another one of these transitions today, and this one's either call it mobile computing, cloud computing, virtual computing, whatever name you want to give it. We're finally moving close to this vision of being able to deliver any content to any device, no matter where they are, and it's driven by the trends you see here on the screen. Some of the more notable ones, obviously, when you look at the evolution of wireless networks, not just wireless LAN like I have here, but also on the cellular side, we're at a point in our history now where we're able to do really the same things on our wired and wireless devices with very little difference in user experience. And I think that's been a big reason why you're seeing the computing explode the way it has in the form of things like tablets and devices. Obviously, we've got a growing mobile worker population. My research shows that just a shade under 50% of employees now are mobile, and that are people that spend more than a third of the time away from their primary work location. Consumerization of IT has been a very strong driver as well. But when you take all these factors and you push them together, it really does create a much different IT environment than we've had in the past. In fact, if you look at just the end user toolkit, it's changed a lot as well. back when I was in IT, this was the toolkit on the left is what we kind of had. You had the corporate issued BlackBerry, the corporate issued Windows laptop, the Microsoft Office suite, and the VPN client to work. Now, I liken that to being having a very portable workforce, and what I mean by that is you took that Windows device, you preloaded it with all the content and all the apps that you'd ever possibly need. You'd go around from place to place, you'd plug in, and boom, you'd have what you want. The downside of this was, what if you didn't have that device? Then you really couldn't work. Today, you look on the right-hand side, and users have actually managed to manufacture a more mobile environment versus portable. And what I mean by that is the ability to put content in things like Dropbox or Box or whatever, and then be able to go pick it up from a different device when I need it. They're always changing devices. We have things that were kind of unusual in the past in the workplace, like Macs in the workplace, people working from home. Even Wi-Fi at one time was kind of an unusual thing. All those things have become norm now, and it's created it's played a lot of havoc with the IT individuals, because these are inherently applications and devices that IT does not have tight control over. While the client side has changed, our infrastructure had as well. When you think of the way we deployed applications in the past, we did so in these very tight silos. If you look at the left-hand side, application one, and maybe it's your voice platform or it's ERP or something, had its own management tools, its own compute, its own servers, its own storage, its own network, and we deployed these things in very tight silos. And we replicated this on an application-by-application basis. Now, this was designed in an era where the performance of the application really outweighed the cost. And so this was a very expensive model, and it's one of the reasons why we had industry stats like prior to virtualization, utilization of servers was roughly about 20%. Storage was about 25%, right? Networks was about 30%. And the reason the utilization was so low is because we would dedicate these resources. Now, in an odd way, it was really the worst way to work, because let's say in application one you had a storage device that was full, and in application two it was virtually empty. You couldn't take resources from one to the other. You had to just go buy more disk for application one. Today what we've done is we've taken our IT resources, we've virtualized them, we're locating them in pools, and if you look at the long-term vision of where companies like Cisco and VMware and IBM are going, it's to have an IT environment where all of our IT resources are located in these virtual pools, and then our applications go and access them when we need them. Now, the problem is, the challenge has become that when we have a much more efficient environment, but troubleshooting application one meant that you, on the left-hand side, you went and checked the compute dedicated to that application or the storage dedicated to that application. That doesn't exist on the right-hand side because everything's shared. And so, I'll give you a much better example. When you think of something like enterprise voice, this even had its own dedicated network. So the voice service was made up of a PBX or a key system, a phone, a cable, and a connection to the PSTN. If the phone wasn't working, IT could start by troubleshooting the PBX phone, cable, or PSTN, and guaranteed it was one of those four problems, right? Today, though, because we have a desire to do more with this technology and do things like create on-demand call centers, have people on the other side of the globe be able to four-digit dial, least cost routing, being able to use your mobile phone as an office phone. Because we have a desire to do all this stuff, we've created this overly complex environment. So you take just the PBX functionality, right? That could live on a dedicated physical server. It could live on a shared server, a virtual server. It could be pushed into the cloud, put in a hosting center, right? It could be running on its own dedicated network, running a shared network. From a client perspective, we could be using VoIP phones, IP phones. We could be using peer-to-peer VoIP, a soft phone on a laptop, a soft phone on a mobile phone, voice-enabled applications. We might be using a combination of SIP trunks and regular trunks. And so troubleshooting this environment is much more difficult. Now, I'm not saying don't do it, right? There's obviously a tremendous amount of value in doing this because, again, we're able to do things that we could never do before. All I'm trying to point out is that because of this, the environment has gotten sufficiently more complex. Now, when we look at the management tools, historically, management tools have been built on these 4 pillars, and that's periodic reports and red and green lights, static technology maps, and network probes and agents. And these 4 things, in my mind, were really meant for IT in the static era. And you think of something like a topology map, right? That's great when all your resources are physical and can actually be put into a topology map. But what happens when an application developer creates a new virtual server, right? You don't really know where that is. Or if a user brings a consumer device in, or a new network is created using SDN technology or something, that static topology map no longer is accurate, right? Network probes and agents are fine. They're very difficult to scale. Doing the analytics are tough. Red and green lights, and this is an interesting one because how often do you talk to peers of yours where they tell you that everything's green on my dashboard but things aren't working? Well, why is that? It's because the focus of the management tools isn't in the right place. And of course, with periodic reports, we live in a much more real-time environment now, so periodic reports are fine when you don't need real-time updates, but if you do, then of course you need a different type of tool. Now, legacy management is built with a very bottoms-up mentality. And what I mean by that is when you look at all the IT elements that make up a service, right? These are things like databases, app servers, apps themselves, firewalls, routers, switches. They all have their own management tool, right? Cisco Works, HP Top Tools, things like that. Each element gives off its own errors, log files, things like that. And in a way to try and understand what's happening, we built these manager of managers, these MOMs, right? And we rolled all these events up to one common console, and they scrolled by really fast and nobody could read them. And then we decided to build rules in place to be able to filter some things out. But ultimately, I remember doing research in this area of root cause analysis back 5, 6, 7 years ago, sometime in that time frame, and these tools were really only about 2/3 accurate. So people would spend literally millions of dollars over the years trying to get these tools to work better for 2/3 accuracy. And that was with static IT, right? And so if you can imagine the environment we're in now that's highly mobilized, consumerized, and virtualized, that number drops way below 2/3, probably down to less than 1/4. And so, clearly, this isn't the tools we need moving forward. Now, this does bring up our first polling question. I do want to get a pulse of the audience and understand where people are. And the question is, which of the following is causing your greatest network management challenges? Is it running VoIP on your network? Is it video? Obviously, I've seen a tremendous amount of video growth over the last couple of years. Bring your own device, virtualization, or wireless LAN. And I've got my own feelings as to how this might play out. Obviously, these are all very hot trends right now. But we're going to leave that poll box up for a couple of minutes. I'll continue on with the presentation, and then when we do have the results, I'll share them with you. Now, the other thing that legacy management leads to is something that I like to think of as resolution ping pong. And in fact, I used to run a help desk back in the day, and I heard all the jokes back then. My help desk was called the no help desk, the need help desk, the helpless desk, things like that. And the reason is because users would get frustrated. They'd call in, and a ticket would get created, and it would get passed off from the database manager to the server manager. It would make its way around and finally make its way down to the network manager. The network manager's role was really to prove it wasn't their problem and then pass that back up to the other groups. And so IT had a very, very difficult time identifying problems. There was no sense of user centricity. So it wasn't, the management really didn't care about whether the user was having a problem. There was the ability to do any kind of cross-group collaborative troubleshooting wasn't there. And I think this has led to a change in IT management strategy. And as a former IT individual, a lot of times I take great offense in the concept that IT is falling behind. It's not that they're falling behind, it's just that the tools haven't really kept up to help us manage these overly complex environments that we have today. And that's led us to this current state of IT where it really isn't scalable. And some of the interesting stats I'll show you here, a little over a third, 37%, 7% specifically, of network downtime is due to human error. This is primarily because we live in these firefighting modes. How often do you find yourself trying to telnet into a branch router or a switch, trying to make changes on the fly. Things don't work, and then you got to reload the thing to be able to get the service back up and running. Right? 90% of time to fix problems is actually trying to identify the problem. So if we had better tools that could visually show us how to identify problems, and I see the results up here, by the way, and I'll discuss them in a minute. What I always recommend to people is they're looking at new management tools, focus on tools that help you identify problems. That's going to give you the biggest bang for the buck. 83% of a company's budget is now used to keep the lights on. And this last number I find fascinating, that 3/4 of problems are identified by the user, not by the IT department. And that's because we have these reactive management tools that tell us there's a problem when the user already knows there's the problem. Now, going back to the poll results here, the most popular answer by far was bring your own device. And that doesn't surprise me because as a CTO once said to me on a panel, he felt like success for him was based on how fast he was willing to give up control over his IT environment. Now, of course, he said that in a very joking, tongue-in-cheek way, but the one thing bring your own device has caused is for IT to lose control over something that they historically had very tight control over, and that's the endpoint. And if you think about cloud-based applications, the applications aren't far behind as well. And so that does create a significant shift in your IT management strategy, where if you can't rely on the endpoint, you need to push those control points into somewhere that's more scalable. And in my mind, that's actually a good role for the network to be able to play. So it's great to, it's fascinating to see. VoIP is number 2. It still shows the relative, I think, despite the fact that the technology has been around over a decade, the relative immaturity of VoIP as a production application as IT managers try and get this to work a little bit better. Then you can see the other 3 are all tied. Now, back to the presentation. All these different things we brought into the corporate IT environment, things like wireless access, unified communications, MDM, BYOD, cloud computing, have added to the complexity. And so when you think about, if you're a math person, there's something called the n-squared problem, where the more nodes you have, the complexity of that equation goes up by a factor in the number of choices you have. And that's kind of what we've created here. In the example I gave you with voice over IP, if you had only one way to deploy things, the complexity is relatively simple. As soon as I create a choice, something like virtual server, physical server, soft phone, hard phone, now my complexity's gone up by a factor of 2 squared, or 4, right? And so now that we've added in virtualization, mobility, cloud, things like that, our complexity has gone way up. IT budgets haven't gone up accordingly, and that's what's created this complexity chasm. So again, I don't believe IT's fallen behind. I think what's happened is the environment's gotten more and more complex, and this focus on creating a seamless, consistent user experience gets harder and harder to do the more options we bring into IT. And again, I'm not saying don't do these things, because they're great at projects and great initiatives. They can make users more productive. I'm just saying that there are troubleshooting problems, and in fact, this perfect storm of IT that I brought up actually has a dark side to it, where it does create the perfect storm of IT challenges. So this is going to take us to our second polling questions, and I'd just like to get a simple yes/no here. Do performance problems fall under the radar of your current monitoring solutions? I suspect I know what the answer is going to be here, primarily because you're on this webinar to learn, but I do believe that performance and user-centric, some sort of user-centric understanding just hasn't really been a focus of many management tools over the years. So when the results are in, we'll certainly share those with you, but I'll get back to the presentation. Now, the impact that performance problems have, this was a survey I did of actual users, where I asked them how much productivity is impacted by poor app performance and availability. And you can see here across a variety of different applications, anywhere from 16% down to 10%. The average for all applications, interestingly enough, was 14%. So when you think about this whole desire of trying to do more with less, if we could just simply make the stuff we have work better, you would arguably get a double-digit percentage improvement in productivity. Even if you don't hit that true 100% number, say only half of it, you get high single-digit improvement in productivity based on the fact that we just simply make the stuff we have work better before going into all those other things that we have. So it is fascinating to see how email is still number one. I think everybody gets frustrated with the amount of use there. And you can see from our poll results, almost 3/4 of the respondents respond positively to performance problems falling under the radar of the current management tools. Again, that's not a big surprise from my standpoint. I think it's not really been a focus of management tools in the past. Anyways, back to the presentation. The other point I want to make around downtime and outages and poor performance is it does cost money. This is, and so what this shows you in the brokerage industry, a little over $5 million is lost every hour of downtime. Retail is less than that, but banking and media are somewhere in the middle. The more network-centric organizations get, though, the bigger this number becomes. So even retail organizations that are moving to cloud-based applications, this number will go up. Legal firms moving to cloud-based applications, this number will go up. So the thing with the top few verticals is they were network-centric organizations to begin with, right? And I think what you'll see over time is that no matter what type of organization you're in, the dependency on the network continues to grow. Therefore, the outages that you face will wind up growing this number over time. So this is why IT management strategy has to shift. It has to move away from being an element and device management focus and more to service management focus. So instead of focusing on the individual IT element, focus on managing the user service. Do you really understand what that user is experiencing and when it's time to try and start troubleshooting when a problem is going to occur? Can you predict that? The element focus has very, very discrete data stores that aren't correlated at all. Service-focused management, or service management if you want to call it, has the intelligence to analyze many of these data sources and provide good analytics to be able to help you understand what all that data means. With traditional management or legacy management, there is no relationship between the data and user experience. On the service management side, this is where we measure and respond to user experience changes much more rapidly. And I think the big shift here is at the bottom. Legacy management is ideal for static environments, and what you need is a tool that's really made more for dynamic and virtual environments. And that's really the world we live in today, where everything's dynamic, everything's virtualized. And the reason this is becoming important, and this was a network manager survey that I ran, I asked what is the top priority for you in your job today. Improving user experience was the #1 response. And so it doesn't matter what area of IT you're in, improving user experience is a very, very important part of your job. And in fact, for many roles, it's the most important job. So again, we need to think about doing things differently. And so a solution to this is have an IT management strategy that's top-down. That means it's focused on the service per se. It understands the elements that that make up the service, the relationship between those elements, and then is able to predict when a problem might occur. So let's just suppose you have a service like Enterprise Voice. I used that example before. If you have a good baseline understanding of how the service works, and you're able to watch that over a period of time, and you start noticing that the performance is moving away from that baseline ever so slowly, and maybe you have a MOS scoring tool, you don't have users calling you with a problem yet because it hasn't moved away far enough from that baseline that is causing problems, but you can predict that a problem is going to occur. So when I talk about predictive IT, this is what I mean. It's not, in a way, not really proactive, because I believe IT is proactive. It's more having the tools to visually show you when things are going to occur and be able to predict that. And I think that's is really the key here, is giving insight into what's wrong versus just what's up and what's down. Because frankly, we build our environment so redundant today that's what's up and what's down and is almost irrelevant, because we build full redundancy into things. It's really more those brownout type situations. And this brings us back to our last polling questions. And I want to get a sense from all of you that when a problem does occur, how long does it take to resolve? Is it under an hour? Is it 1 to 2 hours? Is it 2 to 4 hours? Or is it more than 4 hours? And if you think back to the vertical chart I had of how much money downtime costs, right? If it's, say, in brokerage and it's more than 4 hours, we're talking about a $20 million problem, right? Now, obviously, the revenues in that market are much higher, so, but still, downtime costs money. performance problems ultimately cost money as well. So understanding user experience is an absolute must, and what you require for that is some sort of holistic view of the end-to-end infrastructure. It's not sufficient anymore to have a partial view, or maybe by using a particular vendor's tools, just having a view of that particular vendor's environment. You need to have that end-to-end view of the infrastructure. It needs to span both the physical and virtual environments. They are very rapidly becoming blended together. It's very difficult to tell sometimes if something's running on a virtual or physical server, virtual or physical network. In fact, if done correctly, you wouldn't notice at all. The management system needs to understand the elements that make up the service, but also, more importantly, the interactions between them, and then be able to baseline that to be able to help understand what acceptable performance is, and then when it moves away from that baseline, when problems start to occur. And ultimately what this leads to is acceleration of problem isolation, because if you understand the relationship between the devices and you understand user experience, you can focus on the areas where the performance of that particular link or that relationship has moved away from the norm, and that's a good place to start your troubleshooting process. And ultimately what you need to do that, though, is a visual representation of the IT environment, one that's built on a service perspective. It's built on things like QoS. It's built on things like understanding NetFlow, because that it tends to, that the network is the only place you can really span these different boundaries of virtual and physical, wired and wireless, consumer and corporate owned. Now back to the results of the polling questions, and this is pretty surprising to see that they're that high. 40% of the responses say that their performance problems last more than 4 hours. Another 40% say it lasts 2 to 4 hours. So 80% of you in the listening to this webinar say that your performance problems cause you more than 2 hours of troubleshooting time, and that is a long time to have an outage. And clearly the state that the technology is moving and how rapidly it's moving really makes developing a better management strategy, a user-centric management strategy, a must. So how do you do that? Well, if you're thinking about how to build a strategy for today's IT environment, again, I've talked about the importance of end-to-end visibility, but you really need to have that across your IT infrastructure, across the entire network, not just part of it. Interaction tracking and recording can give you a view of the experience. Again, a lot of this has to do with baselining. It does let you build a more user-centric view of the infrastructure instead of an infrastructure view of the users. So it's flipping that bottoms-up model to something that's more top-down. Ultimately, it leads to faster identification time, and again, it leads you to avoid what's wrong instead of fixing what's down. And that's really one of the keys. And I want to show you an example of our sponsor for this webinar, Action Pack Networks. I think they've got a very good set of tools that help focus on the service element of it. Things like they can help you manage the entire QoS workflow. So what this does is it enables you to immediately see and know what's happening in your network, so you can roll out QoS changes and verify these with real-time visibility. Its historical QoS reporting and forensics also helps you make good informed decisions and be more predictive. And again, that predictive term is very important. And I know a lot's been written. If you look at some of the mainstream press, they talk a lot about creating proactive IT. Again, my fundamental belief is IT is proactive, has always been proactive, but it needs predictive tools to enable a better level of proactivity. And something like the managed entire QoS workflow can help do that. Action Pack also has some auditing of QoS policies, so you can audit them like a very high-level engineer would. So they've built in audit capabilities based on industry best practices. LiveAction will actually review all the devices being managed and create some reports to be able to help you audit these things. It's got end-to-end system-wide NetFlow visualization. I really like this feature. I think NetFlow is a very, very powerful tool that can help recreate network problems. It can help network engineers recreate the models of a network if it moves in a certain direction. But it's a great way to understand the interaction between devices and be able to create baselines. And NetFlows so whatever you whatever tool you wind up using, whether it's action-packed or not, make sure it has NetFlow capabilities, because NetFlow is really, in my mind, the only way to be able to monitor across these different boundaries, again, of physical and virtual, wired and wireless. It can help you verify service level agreements. So if you are an organization that sets service levels, you need to be able to manage them, test them, do some historical reporting of these things, but also be able to measure them in real time. And so SLAs is a good proxy for user experience in most cases. And when I talk about user centricity, building SLAs based on baselines is a good way to be able to do that. It can help you deploy and troubleshoot voice, video, and other real-time applications. The real-time nature of LiveAction gives you a real-time view of how the network's performing. So if you notice some sort of degradation in quality, that immediately is going to help you understand where a voice-video problem might be and speed up the troubleshooting process. And lastly, it can help you reduce network downtime and degradation. So by providing real-time situational awareness and forensic capabilities across NetFlow and QoS, they're able to ultimately help you find problems faster, have less downtime and less degradation, and hopefully get these polling numbers down from 2 to 4 hours or 4 to plus hours to under an hour. And that's ultimately what's going to help IT the most, to be able to find these problems and fix them faster. But I just wanted to share that with you, because I think action-packed is LiveAction is a very, very good example of the visual tools that I've been talking about throughout this webinar. So I'm down to my last few slides. I want to talk about why I think the network should be leveraged for intelligence. When you think of typical IT hierarchy, the network really has been thought of as kind of the pipes of the organization, or maybe the least important part, but it's actually become the most important part. Cloud computing and mobile computing are network-centric computing paradigms. And if that's the case, the network has to play a more important role. It's the single IT resource that connects everything. It's one of the few IT resources that IT actually controls and manages. Packet flow or net flow information reveals those relationships between the different IT elements that make up services. It is, in my mind, the only place to really measure user experience, because it does have that packet flow capability. It can uniquely span physical and virtual, and if you can leverage metrics from single or common sources, that's more powerful than trying to correlate information from multiple sources yourself. And the last thing is that thinking about the CTO who was joking with me and said that he felt like he was giving up control, you want to take the traditional management and security control points that you had in the past, that maybe you had on clients or you had on the server in the application, and push it to somewhere that's more scalable and something that IT owns. In my mind, that is the network. I think it's a great platform for application and service level visibility to help you understand what user experience is. So the future of network management, in my mind, is a user experience focused tool that can help eliminate a lot of the IT blind spots that exist today, and there are many of them. I think SLAs are going to shift away from network-driven metrics like the amount of milliseconds it takes packets to move across your backbone, to something that is more SLA-driven. And again, you need to have the audit tools on the SLA side to be able to verify that you're adhering to them, but ultimately that's what you want the SLA to be. And they need to be real-time in nature to be able to handle applications like the emerging video applications, voice, VDI. These things increase the need for change as well. So this is my last formal slide, then we'll move into some Q&A. And I just want to summarize this by saying that managing the user experience, or service management, is really one of the most important elements of being able to manage this virtualized, mobilized, consumerized world we live in. Real-time communications, the business applications, network and security, all these things are coming together, and we need to be able to manage them differently from a user-centric view. Management is also a cross-silo discipline, so ultimately, whatever tool you deploy, you want other environments to be able to use them and help troubleshoot them, and maybe get into some cross-functional planning. In fact, if you think about just understanding the relationship between the devices, any movement away from the deviation from any deviation from norm could indicate a security problem. So maybe the security team might be involved, might be interested in beefing up the management tools as well. I think service management in a lot of ways masks the complexity that we put on IT, and the reason it does is because we flipped that model around. We're not trying to go bottoms up and then manage the complexity ourselves. We're going top down, and we're building the complexity into the management tool to be able to give us a different view of it, so we're not dealing with a lot of things we used to have to. And I think this change must occur if IT is going to scale effectively over time. So I want to thank everybody for listening to this webinar and spending the last 40 minutes or so. We do have some time for questions, and to get to them, I'm going to turn it back to our moderator, Ray.
Thanks very much, Zeus. It's really interesting, the perfect storm is sort of like a double-edged sword, right? Because, on the upside, it's anytime, anywhere communications, but on the downside, it's as a result of that, it adds to the complexity of the network. So it's, I appreciate your insight, and the importance of how important it is to have, end-to-end visualization within your network to help optimize the performance of it. So we do have a few questions here, Zeus. So let me ask the first one here for you. Are there industry standard ways of benchmarking applications such as video and VDI similar to the way MOS is used with VoIP?
Well, no, there aren't. I mean, MOS is great for VoIP, and for those of you who don't know what MOS is, and I appreciate whoever submitted this question, it stands for Mean Opinion Score, and it's a numerical way of rolling up a lot of those network stats and coming up with whether voice quality is good or not. And so if it's over 4, it's a scale of 0 to 5, and if it's over 4, it means voice quality is good. And if it's below that, it means voice quality is bad. I think, I know the IT is developing video MOS, and I think there's something in draft now. But the best way to be able to handle things like video and VDI is to be able to create your own baselines. In fact, in some ways, you don't even really need MOS for VoIP. You know within your own organization where acceptable quality is and where problems occur. If you can set those thresholds with your management tool, you're able to then kind of recreate your own standards and then be able to monitor from there. So I think the important part here, Ray, is the ability to set benchmarks and thresholds, understand when you're a certain deviation away from that threshold, problems will occur and users will call with problems, but get to the troubleshooting aspect before you hit those things. So while there aren't, de facto, there's no MOS for VDI per se, companies can actually manufacture themselves by understanding their own unique environment.
Thanks very much. We have another question for one of our attendees here. What have you seen companies do with the structure of their IT operations to accommodate the industry change?
Yeah, this is an excellent question because we can talk about doing all the things we want with our management tools, but ultimately the structure of IT operations has to change as well. Convergence, software-defined networks, all these things going on in the industry today, mobility, are bringing a pretty significant change to IT. So I think IT operations does need to change. You need to have cross-silo responsibility. I think you can't have just a network manager, just a server manager, that type of thing anymore. You need to be aware of what's going on, above and below where you sit in the stack. And what I've seen companies do in the past is they'll take, say IT and networking, which have historically been separate disciplines, and roll them up under one person. But somehow cross-group accountability has to be brought to that. And the companies that have done it well have actually given the network team a seat at the CIO table, which again has been spotty over the years, but I think ultimately you want to involve networking and communications in a lot more of the IT decisions than companies have in the past.
Great, thank you. Maybe another question here is, how does Bring Your Own Device change management strategies?
Well, BYOD is a fascinating technology to me, or a set of, challenge, I'll call it, because it breaks down a lot of the fundamental principles that IT worked with in the past, and that is control. When I was in IT, in fact, the COO of one of the companies I worked for, and hopefully there's no one from the company listening now, was so technology illiterate that they would actually he would print emails off, he would put it in a typewriter, type his response, and interoffice it back to you. So with that person, I can go, if a user wanted to use a personal device, I would simply go to him and say, look, this is against their IT policy, right? And he would support it. The difference today is it's the CEOs and COOs coming to IT individuals and saying, I don't care if the iPad isn't part of our corporate policy. You need to make it so, right? And so the challenge here becomes, if I was able to manage experience or able to manage problems by having endpoint agents and things like that, I don't have that control over the endpoint anymore. In fact, I'm not even sure that next week the user will even have this device, because when you look at how fast these things are being developed and how rapidly they're being changed, I think it does change the way. So I think from a management strategy perspective, you want to take a lot of the things that you'd used to do at the client endpoint and push it into the network. So management, to me, moves away from being client-centric to being more network-centric, and that has to do with the change the computing paradigms, which is it moves away from being, the traditional IT was computing-centric, and now it's become network-centric with cloud mobility, and so I think that's how it's changed. It's made the network much more important.
Mm-hmm. We have, I think, one more. We have time for one more question, if you don't mind here. Yes. The question is, does MediaNet help with establishing video benchmarks or standards?
It does in Cisco environments. I mean, MediaNet is Cisco's architecture for multimedia traffic. I think if you follow their architecture, you'll get a good understanding of where the video benchmarks is. Ultimately, you'd want to run another management tool over it, something like LiveAction, to be able to establish what those mean to the user. So it gives you the capabilities of doing so, but in of itself isn't going to create, I don't believe creates video benchmarks itself, but that's where, a vendor like the sponsor of this LiveAction would actually come into play by helping with that.
Great. Thank you. So it looks like we're at our 45-minute mark, and we do want to be respectful to the audience and give them back their time. If folks are interested in downloading a free trial of LiveAction, they can go to this site here, and actually, we will be sending the presentation and webinar out recording, so we will notify you folks then. If folks want further information, they can go to that website, or else there's also some contact information. We have Steve Adams and Keith Parsons who will be happy to answer any of your questions or have a live demonstration at your convenience. So we want to thank everyone here for attending today. We appreciate the time that you've afforded us during the day. I want to thank Zeus Kerravala. Zeus, thank you very much. I know you're in demand, so we appreciate your time and are privileged that you're with us here today.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Ray.
Sure. So again, everyone, have a great action-packed day, and we will see you next month on our next webinar. So thanks very much.